I got into physics because I thought electromagnetism was magic. I was just enchanted by it. I'm enchanted by light, and the fact that back when I was a child, that you could have a prism and see white light being broken up into colors, and just I was enchanted. So I was enchanted by physics. It's also in my family. I have a lot of family members who are physicists, and when I went into physics at the graduate level at the University of Maryland and came across the EPR, the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen, thought experiment, and so on, and the non-locality, that's when I became really fascinated with these puzzles, with the paradoxes of quantum theory. And it was at that point, after I got my master's, that I decided I really wanted to pursue that kind of examination. And I learned that they were doing that in the philosophy department with Jeffrey Boob, Alan Stairs, and some people there. So that was a tough decision, but I'm really glad that I made that decision.
Now, I guess a meta question: was that decision yours to make under your framework? Is there free will?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, I think, and I've argued, I have a couple of papers on this, and I address it in my books free will. We have constrained will, where we're not completely free, but there are live choices. I believe there are live choices, and I've also argued that there is no sense in which physics rules that out. I mean, it's very common for physicists to issue these edicts, that say physics says we do not have free will, and that's very much incorrect. It's those kinds of judgments are made based on certain interpretations of the physics and certain unnecessary kinds of metaphysical presuppositions that people bring into it that they may not don't be aware they have. So yeah, the physics definitely allows room for there to be real life choices. And in fact, I've argued that that's quantum theory actually suggests that's what's happening in nature.
Okay, so I assume what you're referring to is libertarian free will. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily go along with all the traditions of that approach, but I think there's physics leaves room for there to be unpredetermined choices on the part of agents. Now, what counts as an agent is a huge question, that physics may or may not have anything to say about, but physical theory definitely allows for, even Heisenberg talked about photons making choices when deciding whether to go through a polarizer or not. So there's room in physics for that, for live choices.
If the transactional formulation doesn't care or doesn't make claims about observers, and observers are tied to consciousness, and consciousness is tied to free will, which feel free to dispel any of those claims that I just made, then I find it difficult to see how TI can have something to say about free will in a libertarian sense, because it sounds to me like it would just be probabilistic. And if it's just probabilistic, I don't see where the choice is if it's already given to you by the Born rule. Unless it's non-deterministic, where the probability distribution is not known.
No, the probability distribution is given by the Born rule. I mean, I would never say that the transactional formulation has anything to say about free will. That this is just me talking,
I see. Okay.
But kind of given, like, suppose I think that nature does behave this way. I happen to think it does. I mean, if somebody's found something terribly wrong with this, I would, I'd rethink that, I'd re-examine that. But, if nature really does work, in a way, according to this direct action theory of fields, that in itself is a different subject from free will. All it does is say physics won't forbid it. That's the most that it can say. If this physical theory is genuinely indeterministic, then it leaves room for there to be some theory of free will. It doesn't tell you there is or isn't. It just leaves room for it, which is opposite from, many physicists will say physics tells you don't have free will. And I really don't think that's a fair thing to say, right? So that's yeah, it's delimited in that way. I mean, me just speculating, I obviously consciousness, I mean, personally in my own views, I do think that that you're going to have trouble accounting for consciousness if you're materialistic, and if you if you assume the Cartesian dualism type thing, or if you assume that physical matter is as Descartes envisioned it, which means it's dead. It's by definition non-sentient. Then you've got the hard problem, and you're not going to get consciousness out of that. So that's my view, and I think that consciousness is something that's much more fundamental than any physical theory.
Interesting. So you think what lies underneath the iceberg of the iceberg is consciousness? Or perhaps it's the ocean?
Well, yeah, I really think so. I mean, just in a purely logical sense, folks, if you're going to say that the building blocks of nature are dead and non-sentient, then forget it. You're not getting consciousness out of that. End of story. So I'm just to be logically consistent with myself, I am forced into a posture of saying that consciousness must be in there at the basis of everything.
Hmm.
It's just on a logical basis. I mean, by the hard problem. There's only a hard problem. There's only a hard problem if you assume that everything's dead. you know, so I mean, physics doesn't need to. Physics doesn't need to postulate that matter is dead. I mean, why do that? There's no reason to. It's unnecessary. It's just a metaphysical choice that's optional. In my opinion. you know Seems like it, like I can say, well, there's matter that described physics deals with something we call matter. I'm not going to add to that has to be dead. Why would I do that? That's stupid. Like, why do that? I mean, that's just an assumption. It's dead. Why do we have to assume physics describes dead stuff? You don't have to. There's no reason. Or non-sentient. I'm going to define matter is non-sentient. Why? Nobody put a gun to your head. You didn't have to do that. you know, I mean, to me, it's kind of hubristic. Just say, okay, you don't know what life is. You don't know what consciousness is. So that doesn't mean you have to forbid it from being part of your theory. Just say your theory doesn't have anything to say about it. Maybe later it will, So that's my position is don't foreclose possibilities if you don't have to.
Would you say that rivers or a rock or snow or H2O or carbon dioxide have experiential elements to them, or that they're conscious?
I don't know. I mean, I can't assert that. But like Heisenberg himself said that the photon is making a choice whether to go through the polarizer. So maybe they do. I mean, again, that's a question of at what level could you say something begins to be like self-conscious or begins to be deliberative? And, I don't know, who knows that I don't purport to have those answers. But certainly that, the indigenous traditions thought so, and people might say, well, they weren't scientific. Well, maybe they were, but in a different way. So, I mean, people have traditions that kind of take that for granted, and of course, those kinds of traditions are usually dismissed by the Western approach. But maybe we need to be a little more open-minded. I mean, we still have to be physically rigorous. And I started out on this exploration being very much, like a Sam Harris person who deprecates anyone who talks along these lines, who talks about things that are not strictly materialistic and involving Cartesian dead matter. So I've been there.
So what changed you?
That it's logically inconsistent. You can't get. I mean, that's the main thing. You can't get consciousness if you preclude it from the outset on a logical basis. And, and also I happen to be, I'm a philosopher and I happen to be interested in various spiritual traditions. And I'm a yoga teacher, so I know something about Indian philosophy. And I've come to respect other traditions and other ways of knowing as having some insight and having, approaches to knowledge that maybe are not within the kind of Western usual scientific paradigm, and along with its sort of constraints. But I've come to respect the some of the wisdom of those traditions. So while I would never try to mix them, I think there are different ways of knowing, and I try to be scientifically rigorous. And when I'm working with physics, I don't postulate stuff that I don't think is warranted. And I try to be logically consistent and try to see where the theory leads me. But when it comes to things like consciousness and life, physics needs to be a little bit more modest, and needs to understand what's within its domain of accountability and what isn't, what it can explain and what it can't, and that it shouldn't that scientific inquiry doesn't need to be constrained and circumscribed by optional metaphysical premises that maybe were useful as kind of training wheels. I think of them as kind of training wheels, that sort of mechanistic approach that led to Newtonian mechanics and so on. But at some point, maybe you need to recognize what's on your bike, what's your bike that's really going to get you places, and what are training wheels that are holding you back. And I think that's where we are now with the mechanistic way of looking at things.
Do you think that we're being held back from further physical inquiry? Is that what this the tricycle being too slow metaphor is talking about? Or is it something like spiritual advancement that is holding us back from?
Well, I mean, really, in terms of physics, we're being held back, I think, from progress in solving a lot of these problems, by physicists not really wanting to consider this direct action picture, this transactional formulation, because it violates their training wheels, because it violates this kind of mechanical, always forward directed space-time is the entire domain of what's physically real. Those kinds of presuppositions, it challenges those. And I think of those as the training wheels in the field of physics. And I mean, again, as our publications show, we already have presented solutions to problems that you'll see people, I see papers constantly come out and say, measurement remains enigmatic in quantum theory. Nobody knows what a measurement is. And I'm like, well, I've been telling you what it is since 2012, and Kramer did 1986. So this is that it's bouncing off, that the answers are there and they're bouncing off because the conventional approach is still, I want my training wheels. Because the price for accepting these kinds of solutions is you got to let go of your training wheels, and you have to let go of your demand for what you call locality, your demand for determinism and mechanical explanations. And those are the training wheels. If you let go of those, you have answers to these problems. We've got the publications. We've got the answer to reconciling the quantum level with the relativistic level. It's out there. And so when people say, we've still got this problem, this unsolved problem of how to reconcile quantum theory with relativity. Well, read the physics communications paper that we've put out in 2024.
New update. Started a Substack. Writings on there are currently about language and ill-defined concepts, as well as some other mathematical details. Much more being written there. This is content that isn't anywhere else. It's not on Theories of Everything. It's not on Patreon. Also, full transcripts will be placed there at some point in the future. Several people ask me, hey Curt, you've spoken to so many people in the fields of theoretical physics, philosophy, and consciousness. What are your thoughts? While I remain impartial in interviews, this Substack is a way to peer into my present deliberations on these topics. Also, thank you to our partner, The Economist.